Today's video will look at the physical geography of South Asia. To begin, we want to ask two questions. How did the Himalayas form, and how do they affect weather patterns? The Himalayas formed by two plates colliding together and pushing the landmass upwards to create some of the largest mountain ranges in the world. These include famous peaks such as K2 and Mount Everest. They play a significant role in the weather patterns throughout South Asia. There's a phenomenon known as orographic precipitation. Orographic precipitation is a type of rain pattern that is seen around mountain ranges, areas of high latitude. Basically, what you have is warm, moist air coming in off of oceans and then striking the side of mountain ranges. As it rises higher into the atmosphere, it eventually cools, causing precipitation or rain. So that one side of the mountain range is incredibly wet, while the other side lies within what is known as a rain shadow. In other words, it is always dry. In South Asia, you have winter season and summer season that brings winds from two different directions. During the winter seasons, the winds blow in from the north across the Tibetan Plateau, dumping all of their moisture on the northern side of the Himalayan mountains. Some of the moist air does make it around the Himalayan mountains, dumping their moisture here in the southeastern section of India. But for the most part, South Asia remains dry during the winter months, which last roughly from December into April. But then, in summer times, starting around June and continuing through September, the wind shifts, blowing up from the south across the Atlantic Ocean and the Arabian Sea to the Indian subcontinent. With these moist air currents comes much needed rains, which fall in a deluge, oftentimes flooding cities. But for South Asians, this is not necessarily bad flooding. This is much needed moisture that is going to feed their rivers, their lakes, and most importantly, their agricultural fields during the important growing season. Sometimes, though, these weather patterns are very destructive in the force of cyclones. Cyclones are weather patterns that usually occur in the Indian Ocean and the South Pacific Ocean. They tend to result in very high velocity, destructive winds combined with heavy rainfall. A phenomenon that has another name here in the United States of America, especially when applied to the Atlantic Ocean, a hurricane. So cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, all the same thing. So today, the Himalayan mountains are an important fact of everyday life or of seasonal life in South Asia. They were formed with the collision of two separate plates, pushing landmass high up into high elevations, resulting in some of the highest peaks in the world. For part of the year, they block much needed moisture coming down across the Tibetan Plateau in the north. And for the other part of the year, wind blows up from the south into South Asia, bringing with it much needed rainfall. Now, the rest of this lecture, we want to examine the physical geography of South Asia. We're going to learn how to read a weather map, and we want to understand the distribution of populations, resources, and agriculture. So South Asia is home to some of the largest human populations in the world. In terms of the number of countries, though, very few countries. The countries that we have here is Sri Lanka, the Maldives, India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, and Pakistan. South Asia's physical geography is varied. You have the Himalaya Mountains, again, some of the highest mountains in the world that lie to the north, basically framing South Asia in. Then you have the Eastern Ghats and the Western Ghats, mountain chains that form a bit of a cone here in India. From the Eastern and Western Ghats, you get some of the principal rivers of India. So the Godavari River, for example, flows from west to east. You have the Krishna River, likewise, flowing from west to east, and the Narmada River down here flowing east to west. Perhaps the most important rivers, though, in South Asia lie in the north. You have the Indus River that cuts from the Himalayan mountains here in the west, carving its way down to the Arabian Sea. Archaeological evidence shows that some of the earliest urban civilizations in this part of the world started along this river. Now, the Indus River Valley is separated from the rest of South Asia by the Thar Desert, very dry, very barren part of the South Asian subcontinent. The other two principal rivers in the north are the Brahmaputra, which actually start north of the Himalayas before wrapping around and connecting with the Ganges River, which flows south of the Himalayan mountains and empties into the Bay of Bengal in the Ganges Delta. The Ganges River is known by another name here in South Asia, the Ganga River. And it is perhaps the most important river for people living in this part of the world. First of all, in terms of agriculture, the Indo-Gangetic Plains are among some of the most fertile regions in this South Asian subcontinent. But it's not simply agriculture that makes the Ganges River valuable. It's also considered a sacred river. There are many events in Hindu religion involving the many gods of the Indian people that have to do with the Ganges River. So during certain religious festivals, Hindu pilgrims will actually come to places in the Ganges River to bathe in the water as part of their spiritual activities. In terms of population, most of the population in India resides along the rivers that carve their way throughout the South Asian subcontinent. So here we have a population density map with a dark purple representing the highest densities of population. If we were to actually go and draw the Ganges River, the Brahmaputra River, Indus River, and the many other rivers flowing, the Godavari, the Narmada, the Krishna River, we'll notice that the bands basically follow along with these river valleys. Again, the population density in South Asia is incredibly high. India is second only to China in terms of human populations. For economic activities in South Asia, they have quite a bit. We'll notice that there is a lot of farming that occurs in this part of the world, but most of it is what is known as subsistence farming. Subsistence farming is a type of farming in which a farmer basically produces really just enough for his needs and his family's needs, with a little bit left over for sale at a local market. So it's not really the large-scale commercial farming that the United States of America has, for example, that supports a highly developed society and economy. So a lot of subsistence farming, not a lot in terms of investments in heavy machinery, so they're not producing a lot of wealth in terms of agriculture. It's really just to kind of keep up the bare needs of their population. Now, outside of that, what else are you going to have? You do have some of their more valuable farming occurring in these small little patches down here really in the south. It's labeled commercial farming on the map. It's also known as plantation farming. India, since antiquity, has been known for its spices and its teas. And these are still products that India produces that fetches a large price on the international market today. And so these little concentrations, this is where you're going to find a lot of that activity. Outside of that, though, India is becoming one of what we call the developing countries of the world. So you see these little dark purple splotches right in these areas. Not a lot of them, but they're there. These are areas where manufacturing is, becoming more noticeable in the subcontinent. So as factories basically leave highly developed countries like the United States of America and the European Union, they oftentimes relocate to places that have lower environmental laws and lower wages to kind of take advantage of some of these these savings and profits. And so India, along with China, Guatemala, Vietnam, these are some of the places where we're seeing these factories reopening. So on the one hand, it does bring much needed jobs to places like Bangladesh and India, but on the other hand, it does bring some challenges. So again, they don't really have labor laws that protect workers in these factories. They don't have minimum wages that guarantee a living wage. So while people are finding jobs in here, while they are, better than the jobs that they had before these factories existed, they're still very low paying and in some cases very dangerous. So in the case of Bangladesh, about 5 years ago, a fire broke out in a garment factory, which killed upward to 1,500 workers, leading to international outcries and, a movement in places like the United States of America for clothing manufacturers to start, treating their workers better in places like Bangladesh. In terms of resources and vegetation, much of South Asia exists within what's known as tropical grassland. This is basically similar to the savanna areas of Africa. And the llanos, for example, of South America. However, they do have areas of tropical rainforest here as well. There are large sections, though, that are semi-arid and arid, especially here in the west in the Indus River Valley. Now, India does have resources in some parts of the subcontinent, but not quite as many as places like, say, Africa. So down here in the southern part, especially along the eastern coast, where most of them are located, what we'll find are metal ores such as iron ore. We'll find reserves of coal, aluminum, which is a very important modern-day industrial metal. But we'll notice that one thing that they're pretty short on are energy sources such as natural gases and petroleum. So they're very much resource dependent in other parts of the world for that. Now, two natural resources that India and Pakistan both have, one natural resource that India and Pakistan both have is uranium, which these two countries have used to produce nuclear weapons that have allowed them to enter into this very select club of countries that really just includes countries like Russia, the United States, France, Great Britain, and China. Now, one thing that we'll notice about natural resources, though, is that the Himalayas, they are pretty lacking in terms of natural resources that can be used. So some of these smaller countries like Nepal and Bhutan that basically reside wholly in the Himalayas, we're going to see that they're going to have much smaller economies. Now, one skill that we need to be able to use in our day-to-day lives is to be able to read weather maps. And what better time to learn about weather maps than when we study the physical geography of a country whose successes and failures and livelihood depends on the arrival of their summer monsoons. So when we look at weather maps, we'll notice that there are some important symbols here and color patterns. Your color patterns are going to indicate your temperature. So usually you're going to have in your blue colors, your colder areas, darker red colors are going to be your hotter temperatures. Now after that, some other symbols that we want to pay attention to are high and low pressure areas, as well as these symbols that represent cold fronts and warm fronts. So starting with the cold and warm fronts, what we need to pay attention to when we look at these cold and warm fronts is, first of all, the symbol right here on these lines. So right here, triangles are always going to represent cold fronts, and then the direction of the triangle is going to represent the direction that the front is actually moving in. So if you want to know which way the front's coming, just take a look and it'll show you, if it's coming towards you or is it going away from you. Now, in areas where you have both symbols, this means that you have a meeting of warm and cold fronts, and it's become stationary, so it's not really moving. It's just kind of parking itself above that area. So with cold fronts come colder temperatures. With warm fronts come warmer temperatures. Usually when the two meet, it does bring the chance of rain. Now, pressure systems are important on weather map because it actually tells you where you have chances of precipitation. So taking a look here at this meeting of your cold front right here as it travels and your warm front right here, what we'll notice is this little low pressure area. What happens with low and high pressure has to do a lot with what's going on in the atmosphere. So with the high pressure, what's happening is all of these atmospheric gases are being pushed down to the Earth's surface. And as they are pushed down, they will oftentimes raise temperatures, but they'll also dry out the air and cause wind currents to blow away from the pressure system. So it's going to affect, how windy it is on that day, which direction the wind's blowing in, and it's also going to usually make it drier with the possibility of also making it warmer. Cold air systems, on the other hand, very low air pressure systems, on the other hand, mean that the air pressure is going to be able to rise. So all these atmospheric gases are going to be able to rise vertically. And as they rise vertically, what's going to happen is that they're going to cool as they rise, eventually condensing, and it's usually going to lead to rain falling. And of course, as they're rising, as they're kind of going in, the wind is going to be blowing up into this direction. So if you want to know if it's going to rain on a certain day, what do you need to look for? Well, you need to look and see, is there a warm and a cold front? Are they meeting? Is it in a place with low air pressure? And then after that, to determine whether or not it's going to be rain or snow, just simply ask the question of how cold it is.